psychology, we try to be scientific, and we have this fundamental problem that other sciences don't really have. So, well, what problems do other things have? They need money for funding, which can be sort of a government hassle thing, or just maybe it requires a really lot of money, like the Large Hadron Collider, um, is just this really huge apparatus, miles and miles across. It's a big ring, and it has a pretty specific purpose. It just hits tiny particles together, subatomic particles, and observes what happens to them. But it costs, I don't know how many dollars, ridiculous amount of money to build and to run, and it's big, and it's just money is a big issue for a lot of sciences, and also, in physics and chemistry also, you kind of have this danger factor. I don't know, that's danger. You're working with chemicals, and if you're doing an experiment, you don't know what's going to happen, and maybe it'll explode in your face, maybe it'll make a poison. Anything can go wrong. In physics, you can, drop things on you or cause an explosion. And so other sciences have their things, but the problem with psychology, the most basic one, is that we're studying the mind. And it's just, how do we get information on the mind? We can pick apart the brain, but the brain and the mind are slightly different. The brain is just a physical thing, and the mind is not. So we kind of have this model where it says we put an input or a scenario, or you can call it whatever you want, into the mind, and the mind is this magical black box that we can't see what it is, we can't see inside, we don't know, and it will give us out, I don't know, I could write output, or we could say behavior, and so there's just sort of this idea that the mind is this impenetrable box that we can't directly see how it works. It's just we have to try. We'll say, let's say you're on top of a building. That's the input, and then the behavior is that you act scared or whatever. And that's why it's kind of a fuzzy science. You can't get the same solid evidence that you can in physics and stuff. But we have ways of getting quantitative results, and one of those is a survey. It sounds kind of simple, but if we hand out a survey with, a bunch of little tick boxes and questions on it to a bunch of people, then they can answer the questions, and then we can do analysis on that. We can say, we can ask them anything we want, I guess, and sometimes they won't be entirely truthful. People do tend to lie on surveys, but then we can say, whatever two factors they are, we can say income versus personality. If they, it's hard to quantify personality, I don't know. Income versus age. We can say older people tend to make more, and people under 16 don't make any money, so we can correlate things. Maybe that's not a psychological thing, but you know how it is. We can correlate things by a survey. And then another way, which I guess survey kind of falls on, I'll switch to a new color, is a longitudinal study. Longitudinal. Having trouble writing. And this, the word longitudinal isn't its own thing. It's just means that you do the same study at different points in time. So, if you have a timeline, you could start, you could give a little test, an IQ test maybe, to 5-year-olds, and then you could do it again when they're 20, and then you could do it again, and it just goes on. And longitudinal just means that it happens over and over. You could do a longitudinal survey. You could survey people at different points in their time, or whatever. That's the way of kind of controlling for other factors, which I'll explain here. We have cross-sectional, which is easy to confuse with longitudinal. The difference is that with cross-sectional, it all happens at once. It's like one day you just say, okay, I'm going to survey 5-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and 30-year-olds. And the difference between, the two is that with longitudinal, you're getting the same 5-year-olds that you studied 15 years later, and you're getting the same set of people. It's called a cohort. I'll just write that here. You get the same cohort that grew up, and then this you have a set of 5-year-olds and a set of 20-year-olds that don't have anything to do with each other. These could be the parents of them. And that's an important distinction to make. So longitudinal gives you better results because you can actually see how people progress as they get older. You can actually see the change on a person-to-person basis, or I guess on a cohort-to-cohort basis. But with cross-sectional, the main advantage is that it's cheaper. I guess quicker too. But it all happens at once, and it's easy. But I guess it's good for comparing, these 5-year-olds to the 20-year-olds if you want to do that for some reason. But overall, longitudinal gives you more information. And another one, I'm not going to say this is all of the research methods, but observation. And this is sort of similar to just a regular experiment. I guess experimental could kind of fall under this. I'll write experiment. And these two kind of go hand in hand. Experiment. So, just strictly observation is you just watch and you don't really interact. So if you have, very like wild animals, I guess you can't really do an experiment on because maybe they're hard to catch or they act completely different around humans, and so you kind of hide and just watch and see how they react. And this can take a while, and you're not going to get really solid, correlational evidence and everything. And then if you do an experiment, I don't know, that it really depends on your experiment, but it could be expensive, it could take a while. But this is kind of the most informational method, I guess, for they all kind of measure different things. But experiment, let me think. It's good for this kind of thing, like the input and behavior. Going back to this would be an experiment. You set up the input for what you want, and then you get a behavior, and you write that down. You can't really get this with a survey, I guess. But those are the couple different ways that we can make psychology into a real science, or make it objective rather than just feelings. And Freud kind of wasn't doing this a lot. He was just talking with people and trying to get intuitive sense. But then I'll write these guys down. The people who really started making it objective were William Wundt, which I think is spelled Wundt. Actually, there's a pretty small chance that I spelled that right, but it's German and it's kind of spelled weird. But William Wundt was pretty much the first guy to do this. And then I'll also write Skinner down. He deserves a note. Skinner. So, I don't know, Wundt was the first one to sort of say, look, we have to get serious here. We can't just be, loosey-goosey about it. We have to actually get evidence. And so he had a laboratory set up, and he had assistants and took very careful measurements. And Skinner did this whole thing with, I think he came up with operant conditioning or classical conditioning. But he did experiments on rats, and that's why we still kind of use rats today. So, there you go.